Hi, I'm Joe Hackney, and this is my presentation for Congress and the Presidency. My title is Presidential Ideology Impact on Local Government Finances. So my research question is, what circumstances influence presidential administrations to advocate and push for decreasing federal grant availability and application? My hypothesis is that regardless of ideology or political party, if a president's party is a majority party in Congress, the president will subsequently be more willing to propose federal grant programs. So when I was pursuing this, I needed to look for literature that actually looked at this concept, and I found the article State and Local Government Finances: Was There a Structural Break in the Reagan Years by Roy Bal and William Duncombe. In their article, the authors places special emphasis on this being the result of ideological objectives of the Reagan administration. This ideological objective was coined as being an attempt to lessen the dependence that state and local governments have on federal funds by, quote, offloading program and financing responsibilities on the lower level government. The rationale that they indicated by the Reagan administration is that it was a good time to do this economically. So to measure this, the perceived adoption of fiscal conservatism by the Reagan administration and local governments in kind, the authors used the methodology that it will show itself in the following ways, and the ones that I've indicated on the screen are the ways I'm speaking of. So a lower income elasticity of demand for public goods and budgets are less expansionary in periods of economic growth. A surplus that varies in response to expectations about inflation and recession and is therefore less variable over the business cycle. Discretionary revenue adjustments that conform with notions of industrial development more than vertical equity, and a federal aid system that is less simulative of state and local government expenditures. So to continue on with the literature review, the automatic assumption that could be generated from this is that there wouldn't be a decline in expenditures until the onset of decreased federal grant availability in the 1980s. The author's findings indicate that the decline of expenditures gradually began to drop during President Carter's administration. The plausible assumption, and it gains merit with this acknowledgement, is that the trend of expenditure decline drastically increased post the 1980s. Instead of inducing declining of expenditures, President Reagan's priorities simply amplified the decline. The authors conclude that there's enough data to determine that there was a more fiscally conservative stance taken in the 1980s. So to continue on with my research, I wanted to first develop a system that considered two primary factors. So these two primary factors that will be considered was first, the first method is an overall assessment of federal investment will be needed to present how the levels have fluctuated over the years. So for the purpose of this research, I will gather data from President Reagan's administration until President Obama. Using this analysis, we'll cross-analyze, it will provide a cross-analysis of presidential administrations and the amount of control that his political party had in Congress at the time of budget proposals. If there's any noticeable differences in available funding based on presidential administrations and their political parties' power in Congress, this will plausibly show a correlation between president's grant funding objectives with its possibility to pass in Congress. The second method of analysis that I will concentrate on is the percent of shared political party control in Congress with budgetary behavior. This is going to be indicated through documented levels of spending on federal grants to local government. The presence of this element will indicate the validity of my hypotheses. So to move on to my findings, my analysis, the application of these grants is not a new concept by any means. For example, Sophie R. Dales was quoted in 1960 as reporting federal grants to state and localities in the fiscal year of 1958 to 59 reached $6.3 billion. We have data from the CBO that indicated in 2011 the federal government provided $607 billion in grants to state and local government. So this is a big jump from $6.3 billion in 1958 and 59 to $607 billion in 2011. But there's a lot to consider with that. So, for example, the impact inflation has is tremendous. So picked up information that the annual inflation rate from 1960s to 2011 has been 4.2%, 4.02%. So this means that what you could buy for $1 in 1960 would cost you about $7.46 in 2011, and that's from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. So with this alone, inflation has played a role. So if the equation was the same, if the ratio was the same, if grant spending had remained the same per dollar in 2011 as it was in 1958 and 59, the spending levels would reach nearly $462 billion in 2011 dollars. So as I noted before, the CBO said that they're spending about $607 billion. So it's indicating an increased priority placed on investment in grants. So to continue on with the analysis, Chart 3 indicates the function of spending based on total grant allocation. As previously indicated, grant spending reached over $600 billion in 2011. As indicated by data from the CBO in Chart 3, just under $300 billion of that was spent on healthcare grants. In short, the vast majority of health-related costs would be centered on Medicaid spending, of course, but that indicates it's a big portion of that spending that's distributed in the form of grants. Chart 4 indicates that the percentage of federal grants to state and local governments, that's what it indicates, is whatever the share was, as you can see. So to consider the spending on grants by presidents separated by ideology, the following category dividers have been made to indicate grant funding by ideological administration. Each has been separated by ideological differences. So just to make it simple, Republican presidents have been separated from Democratic presidents. So after I did this, I looked at the information from the CBO and I calculated the average grant spending based on percentages during each individual president's time in office. So as indicated in the methodology, this will consist of modern presidents, and primarily I want to focus on President Reagan through President Obama. There isn't a large enough sample size for President Trump, and that's why that he was crossed out of this. So to measure the impact that congressional seat count plays into this equation, I concluded there should be a weight given for each 2-year increment of the given president's term in office. So, for example, each year that a president is in office, for each House of Congress that the president's party controls in Congress, I allocated 1 point. To illustrate this, during President Reagan's first 2 years in office, 1981 to 83, Republicans controlled the Senate, but not the House of Representatives. So for this scenario, I will give President Reagan 1 point. If Republicans had controlled both the House of Representatives and the Senate, I would have allocated 2 points, or 1 point for each respective body of Congress. Once this has been completed, I multiplied the whole number as indicated by the average grant spending in absence of being a percentage with the total number of points secured from the Congressional Majority Point Test, as I call it. After this completed, I divided that total and based on the years served, which will account for discrepancies in the amount of years served as president. So this was the table that I came up with and kind of has the results in it. As you can see, the president with the highest total is President Obama at 16.3. So this also indicates that the amount of grant spending, as we say here, it shows that the grant spending began a sharp decline at the onset of President Reagan's administration. This thought, in accordance with the research by Bile and Duncombe, indicates that spending levels continue to increase post-Reagan. My results show that in the form of President Clinton being at 3.93, President Bush at 10.25, and President Obama at 16.3. President H.W. Bush was required to be omitted from the research given that Republicans did not control the body of Congress during his tenure. Another element that this indicates is that there is less importance placed on the ideology of the president. As this table shows, each president began an increase in grant spending post-Reagan. Even though the results are not concrete, there does seem to be a certain level of importance placed on shared party control of the Congress. So this is at least something we can take from this information. So there appears to be no causation between ideologies and grant spending. This is due to the demonstrated increase during each administration post-Reagan, which has consisted of both Republicans and Democrats. This research indicates that there is a gradual increase in grant spending post-Reagan. However, there is not a clear result that differentiates presidential ideology and control of Congress from a corresponding grant funding. One area that I do feel really comes clear here, and it also confirms Bile and Duncombe's research, is that each administration after Reagan increased in spending. And Reagan was the dip because it was increased all the way up to Carter before him. So Reagan, I guess a good way to put it, was a exception to the rule and doesn't necessarily indicate conservative ideology going forward. So that is my conclusion. That's my research. Thank you for listening.